The Apache women collapsed when the rancher refused to touch them. The sun had just started to rise over the wide, dusty plains of Arizona, painting the sky with soft oranges and pale pinks. The desert seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but for those who lived there, it was a place of constant challenges. Every day required effort, hard work, and careful attention to the land. Samuel, a rancher in his late 40s, was already awake. His mornings began before the sun even touched the horizon. He knew every corner of his ranch, from the small farmhouse to the cattle pens, and even the paths where wild animals wandered at night. Samuel's life had been shaped by discipline, routine, and a strong sense of responsibility. He was a man who believed that life demanded respect, hard work, and fairness, and he had lived by that principle his whole life. On this particular morning, something unusual stirred in the distance. Samuel noticed 3 figures walking slowly along the dirt road leading toward his ranch. At first, he could not make out who they were, but as they came closer, he saw that they were 3 women. Their faces were weary, their clothes worn and dusty, and their eyes carried the weight of recent struggles. They were clearly not from the town or the nearby settlements. Samuel had encountered travelers before, but something about these women made him pause. They moved with care, yet there was a quiet determination in their steps. The 3 women were sisters, though they had not always been together in life. Maria, the eldest, had a strong presence, her eyes sharp and observant. She had learned early in life to protect her younger siblings, and that protective instinct never left her. Lena, the middle sister, had a gentle demeanor. She noticed the smallest details, the pattern of footprints on the sand, the distant movements of birds, the signs of danger or opportunity. Clara, the youngest, was quiet and thoughtful. She often relied on her sisters for guidance, but her curiosity made her watch the world with careful attention. Together, they had survived difficulties that would have broken many people, and their journey to Samuel's ranch was another step in a life full of challenges. As the women approached the ranch, Samuel came out to greet them. He did not rush or act suspiciously, but his posture and gaze were careful. In the past, travelers had sometimes brought trouble or deception, and Samuel had learned to be cautious. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Can I help you?" Maria stepped forward, her hands slightly trembling from the long walk. "Sir," she began, "we are looking for work. We can cook, clean, care for animals, or anything you need. We only ask for a place to stay for a while." Her voice carried both hope and weariness. Samuel studied her face carefully. He could see honesty there, but he also knew that desperation sometimes forced people to say whatever was necessary to survive. "I see," Samuel replied slowly. "And why come here? Why not to the town or the settlement nearby?" Maria looked down briefly, then lifted her eyes again. "The towns are crowded. They do not welcome people like us easily. We heard your ranch is fair and that you treat people well. We only want to work honestly, and we promise we will follow your rules." Samuel considered her words. He had heard many claims, many promises, and many pleas over the years. Most of the time, people's words did not match their actions. But something in Maria's tone, the way she held herself, gave him pause. He sensed strength, honesty, and determination. Still, he had to be careful. "You may stay," he said finally. "But understand this, I have rules here. You will work hard and you will respect the boundaries I set. Do not expect anything more than fair treatment and do not try to deceive me. I do not tolerate dishonesty." The women nodded eagerly. "We understand, sir," Maria said. Lena and Clara echoed her words, their voices soft but firm. Samuel stepped aside, letting them enter the ranch. The ranch itself was simple but well-maintained. There was a farmhouse with a small porch, barns and pens for animals, and fields that stretched toward the horizon. The morning sun reflected off the roofs and painted shadows on the ground. The women took in the surroundings with careful eyes. This was a place where hard work had been rewarded, where order had been maintained, and where a man had built his life on principles. They would have to adjust quickly if they wanted to belong here, but the promise of safety and work was enough to motivate them. Samuel showed them their quarters, a small room in the back of the farmhouse with beds and basic furniture. It was modest, but clean and safe. "This will be your space," he said. "Keep it tidy, treat the house as your own. You will have chores, and I expect you to complete them without complaint." The women thanked him quietly, their voices subdued but sincere. That night, as they settled into the beds, they reflected on their journey. They had traveled many miles through harsh terrain, avoiding dangers and finding food wherever they could. Each day had tested their endurance, courage, and resolve. Yet now, for the first time in a long time, they felt a spark of hope. There was a place where they could rest, work honestly, and perhaps rebuild a sense of normalcy. The next few days were a period of adjustment. Samuel assigned tasks to each of the women according to their strengths. Maria helped with cooking and managing the small garden. Lena worked with the animals, feeding and cleaning them, while Clara assisted wherever she could, learning quickly and observing carefully. The women were diligent, careful, and eager to prove themselves. They understood that their survival depended not only on hard work, but also on trust and respect. Even though their tasks were simple, there was a rhythm to the work that brought a strange comfort. The sun rose, the chores were done, meals were prepared, and the animals tended. In these routines, there was security. The women began to feel that perhaps they could stay, at least for a while. Samuel watched them work from a distance. He noticed their discipline and quiet strength, but he remained cautious. He had seen many people fail when given opportunity, and he was not willing to risk disappointment. Despite the initial respect and professionalism, a subtle tension grew between them. The women came from a community where gestures of warmth and closeness were natural, a culture where support was shown through touch, shared space, and conversation. Samuel, however, had a different way of expressing care, through actions rather than words and always within strict boundaries. He treated the women fairly, ensured they were fed, and offered guidance, but he kept his distance. His silence and reserve puzzled them. Maria tried to engage him in conversation while they worked. She asked about the ranch, his life, and his experiences. Samuel answered politely but briefly, never sharing personal feelings or memories. Lena, too, attempted to offer friendly gestures, small acts of kindness or humor, hoping to see a glimpse of warmth in Samuel's demeanor. Clara would often watch from a corner, trying to understand the subtle dynamics of human interaction she had not seen before. Over time, the women began to sense that Samuel's restraint was not cruelty, but a different form of respect. He valued honesty, work, and dignity above all. They also realized that he expected them to maintain their own integrity, to follow their principles as much as he followed his. This understanding slowly built a fragile connection, based not on affection in the usual sense, but on mutual recognition of character. At the same time, the women missed the comfort and warmth they were used to from their community. The small gestures of touch, reassurance, or encouragement they sought were not forthcoming. They found themselves struggling internally, trying to reconcile the need for connection with the reality of Samuel's boundaries. Their emotions fluctuated between hope and disappointment, trust and confusion. One evening, after a long day of work under the blazing sun, Maria, Lena, and Clara sat together outside the farmhouse. The desert sky was ablaze with stars, and a gentle wind carried the scent of sagebrush. They spoke quietly, sharing memories of their village, their childhood, and the people they had lost. They spoke of fear and hope, of past struggles and dreams for the future. For a brief moment, the weight of their journey seemed lighter. Yet even in these quiet moments, the absence of warmth from Samuel was felt. They longed for acknowledgement, for a sign that their presence mattered beyond their work. They could see that Samuel cared for the ranch and respected them as workers, but his emotional distance created a subtle ache in their hearts. They did not understand that his way of caring was through fairness, protection, and maintaining dignity. As part one drew to a close, the stage was set for the unfolding story. The women had arrived at the ranch weary but determined, seeking safety, work, and a sense of belonging. Samuel had accepted them cautiously, offering opportunity but maintaining his principles. The subtle tension between cultural expectations and personal boundaries was established, hinting at the emotional challenges and growth that would follow. By the end of these early days, the women had begun to learn the rhythm of the ranch and Samuel's ways. They understood that survival required both hard work and careful navigation of relationships. The story of connection, tension, and understanding had only just begun, and the journey ahead promised both trials and moments of discovery that would test the strength, patience, and resilience of everyone involved. The days passed slowly on the ranch, each blending into the next, carrying with them the rhythm of work, sun, and quiet observation. Maria, Lena, and Clara had settled into their chores, and although the routine gave them stability, their minds were often restless. There was a tension in the air they could not fully explain. It was not one of conflict, but of unspoken expectations, small misunderstandings, and cultural differences that quietly tested their patience. Samuel observed the women from a distance, noting their diligence and care. He could see how naturally they worked with the animals, how carefully they tended to the garden, and how thoughtfully they organized their small living space. He respected their abilities, but he also noticed their attempts to reach beyond simple labor, trying to find connection with him. In the afternoons, when the sun hung low and the heat softened, Maria would try to speak with him while he repaired fences or checked on the animals. She asked questions about his life, his past, and the history of the ranch. Samuel answered, but he did so sparingly. He believed in keeping a professional distance, maintaining boundaries he thought were important for both himself and the women. Lena, on the other hand, tried to communicate through gestures and small acts of kindness. She would bring fresh water to him when he worked under the hot sun, offer him the first serving of food at meals, or share small observations about the land. She had grown up in a community where warmth was shown through these small attentions, where relationships were strengthened by acts of care. Clara watched quietly, learning from both her sisters, noting the ways Samuel responded. It was clear to her that he valued their work and dedication, yet he remained emotionally distant. The women did not understand the reason for his restraint. They interpreted his lack of visible affection as indifference or even disapproval. Their hearts longed for reassurance, for recognition that their presence mattered beyond the chores they performed. This quiet frustration began to build, subtle at first, almost invisible but persistent. Each day they tried in small ways to bridge the gap, but Samuel's unwavering principles stood firm, creating a silent barrier they could not cross. One afternoon, Maria approached Samuel while he was checking the water troughs for the cattle. She stood a few feet away, careful not to intrude, and spoke gently. "Samuel, may I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," he replied, wiping his hands on a cloth. Maria hesitated, searching for the right words. "Do you ever feel lonely? Do you ever wish someone would just talk to you or sit with you after a long day?" Samuel paused. His gaze rested on the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent, turning the sky golden. "I am not lonely in the way you mean," he said. "This ranch is my life. The land, the animals, the work, they keep me company. People come and go, but responsibility stays. That is enough for me." Maria nodded slowly, though inside a quiet sadness stirred. She understood that Samuel's answer reflected his values and experiences, but she wished for a softer response, for acknowledgement that went beyond work. Lena, who had been nearby, noticed the small exchange and frowned slightly. She felt the emotional distance as deeply as her sister did, and it weighed on her heart. Clara, standing behind them, felt confusion mingled with admiration. She saw a man who was principled and fair, yet unreachable in ways that made her wonder about human connection. As the days turned into weeks, the women's efforts to connect continued. They shared stories of their childhood, taught Samuel a few words from their language, and sometimes sang quietly while working. Samuel listened politely, sometimes offering a nod or brief comment, but he never allowed himself to become emotionally involved. He respected them, and he protected them in his own way, but he maintained a wall that could not easily be breached. The women began to notice a subtle pattern. When they approached too closely, when their gestures became too personal, Samuel would retreat, not with anger but with firmness. It was as if he had an invisible line, a boundary that could not be crossed. Maria, with her protective instincts, found this especially difficult. She wanted to advocate for herself and her sisters, to demand recognition and warmth, but she knew that Samuel's principles were not something to argue against. She could see that he valued them as people, yet in a way that was different from the intimacy they craved. Lena experimented with different ways of earning his approval. She would perform small acts of helpfulness, organize the tools in the barn, and even attempt to anticipate his needs. Yet, every time she sought a smile or a word of praise beyond basic acknowledgement, she was met with calm neutrality. Clara observed quietly, often retreating to the edge of the garden, thinking deeply about the complexity of human relationships. She realized that affection did not always appear as she expected, and that understanding a person required patience and perspective. One evening, after a particularly long day, the sisters gathered outside their small quarters. The sky was painted with hues of purple and orange, and the air carried the scent of dry earth and sage. They spoke softly, sharing the quiet frustrations they felt. "He is kind, but there is something missing," Maria said, her voice tinged with both sadness and respect. Lena nodded. I think he cares in his own way, but it is not the way we are used to. We want more than just work and rules. We want connection." Clara, the youngest, remained silent for a moment, then said, "Perhaps that is who he is. Maybe connection looks different for each person. Maybe we are learning to see it in a way we do not expect." The women's conversation reflected their growing awareness that human emotions were not simple. Connection could take many forms, and respect could coexist with emotional distance. Yet, the longing they felt for warmth and acknowledgement was real, and it could not be ignored. Over time, Samuel began to notice the subtle signs of emotional strain in the women. He saw the fleeting moments of disappointment in their eyes, the quiet gestures of longing, and the hesitancy that accompanied their attempts to reach out. He realized that while he had maintained boundaries, there was a need for guidance, understanding, and reassurance that he had not fully addressed. He did not know how to express warmth in ways they could recognize, but he understood that his silence had consequences. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, Samuel called the women to help him tend to the small creek that had formed near the pasture. Water had overflowed, and some of the fences had been damaged. As they worked together, the women noticed a small change in Samuel. He spoke more openly about the tasks, shared a few stories from his younger days, and even offered advice that went beyond work. It was a small shift, but significant. It showed that he was willing to engage slowly on a level they could understand. Maria felt a sense of cautious optimism. Perhaps they could find a way to connect without violating Samuel's boundaries. Lena noticed the slight softening in his tone, the rare smiles, and the occasional moments of humor. Clara, ever observant, realized that patience might be the key. The women began to see that human relationships were not always straightforward, and that understanding another person's way of showing care required time, attention, and empathy. Despite these small victories, there were moments of tension. The women sometimes felt invisible, their emotional needs unmet. They longed for reassurance, for acknowledgement that they mattered beyond their work and obedience. Samuel remained a figure of authority, distant yet protective, fair yet strict. The emotional gap between them was a challenge that would not be solved overnight. In these moments, the women turned to each other for support. Maria offered guidance and encouragement. Lena provided small acts of kindness and humor, and Clara observed and reflected, offering quiet insights. Together, they created a small community within the ranch, a network of understanding and care that helped them navigate the challenges of their new life. As Part 2 progressed, the story explored the complexity of human emotions, cultural differences, and personal boundaries. The women learned that connection could take many forms, that respect and care were not always expressed in ways they expected, and that patience and understanding were essential for building trust. Samuel, too, faced the challenge of recognizing the emotional needs of others while maintaining his own principles. By the end of this period, the stage was set for the emotional climax that would follow. The women's longing for connection, combined with Samuel's unwavering boundaries, created a tension that was both subtle and profound. The story was no longer just about survival and work. It had become a story of human understanding, resilience, and the slow, careful construction of trust and respect. The ranch, under the vast sky and endless horizon, was more than just a place of labor. It had become a place of learning, reflection, and emotional discovery. Each day brought new lessons, challenges, and moments of quiet insight. The women and Samuel were connected, not always in ways they fully understood, but in ways that shaped their growth, their understanding, and their sense of humanity. And so the days continued, with the sun rising and setting over the dusty plains, marking the passage of time, the growth of trust, and the slow, careful unfolding of human connection. The women remained hopeful, determined, and patient, while Samuel remained principled, cautious, and fair. The tension, the longing, and the quiet struggle for understanding would soon reach a turning point, one that would challenge each of them and reveal the depth of their resilience, patience, and humanity. The heat of the afternoon had softened into a warm, golden glow. The desert air was still, carrying the faint scent of wild sage and dry earth. On the ranch, the usual routines were underway. Samuel was repairing a section of the fence. The cattle wandered near the pasture, and the women were finishing the day's chores. Yet beneath the calm exterior, a quiet storm of emotions had been growing for weeks. Maria, Lena, and Clara felt it most keenly. The distance Samuel maintained, though understandable, had begun to weigh heavily on them. Their hope for connection, for some sign that he recognized their presence as more than labor, had started to feel like longing without answers. That evening, after the chores were done, the three sisters gathered under the wide porch of the farmhouse. The sky was painted in deep oranges and purples, and the first stars appeared. Clara, the youngest, leaned against the wooden railing, watching the horizon with thoughtful eyes. "I wish he understood us," she said softly. Maria, sitting beside her, tightened her hands in her lap. "He does care," she said, "but not in the way we expect. He shows it differently." Her voice was steady, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her frustration. Lena looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. "I know he means well, but I feel invisible sometimes. It's like we're here, but we don't exist beyond the chores we do." Her words were heavy with longing, and for a moment the air seemed stiller, as if the desert itself had paused to listen. Maria sighed, leaning back against the porch post. "We need to talk to him. We can't keep these feelings inside, but I don't know how to say it without causing trouble." They sat in silence, listening to the faint sounds of the ranch, the low murmur of the cattle, the creak of the barn doors as a light wind stirred, the distant call of a hawk. They knew Samuel respected honesty, and yet the thought of confronting him filled them with anxiety. Still, the weight of unspoken emotions had grown too heavy to ignore. That night, after the last light of the sunset faded and the stars shimmered bright in the clear sky, Maria decided to act. She approached Samuel, who was sitting on the porch steps, reviewing the plans for a new pen he intended to build. His posture was calm, hands folded over his knees, yet Maria could feel the careful alertness in his body. He was always cautious, always ready for unexpected trouble. "Samuel," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "may we speak with you?" He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Of course," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. He gestured for her to sit beside him. Lena and Clara came forward as well, forming a small circle on the steps. Maria took a deep breath. We have been working here for weeks. We are grateful for your kindness, for letting us stay, for trusting us with work. But we feel something is missing. We feel distant. We long for recognition, for understanding, not just for the work we do, but for who we are." Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued, determined to express what had been building inside her. Samuel listened, his expression calm but unreadable. He did not interrupt, allowing her to speak. He had always believed in letting people express themselves fully, believing that understanding began with listening. Lena took a deep breath next. "We try to be good, to help, to follow your rules. But sometimes we wonder if you see us as more than just helpers on the ranch. We want to feel seen. We want to feel that our hearts, our presence matters." Clara, usually quiet, spoke for the first time. "We do not mean to upset you. We only want to understand, to connect. We feel lost sometimes because we do not know if you care in the way we need." Samuel's face remained calm, though he felt a quiet heaviness in his chest. He had known, of course, that the women sought more than simple work. He had seen it in their gestures, their questions, their subtle expressions of longing, yet he had not realized how deeply they had been affected by his distance. He took a deep breath. "I understand your feelings," he said carefully, "and I want to be honest with you. I care for you, I respect you. I value your work and your presence here, but the way I express care is different. I do not show it through physical gestures or closeness in the way you may expect. My way is through fairness, protection, guidance, and keeping this place safe. That is my promise to you, nothing more, nothing less." The women listened, their eyes wide. His words were clear, but they were not what their hearts had been hoping to hear. Maria's shoulders slumped slightly. Lena's hands fell to her lap, and Clara's eyes glistened in the fading light. They had expected warmth, maybe reassurance that went beyond duties, and yet here it was, honesty, fairness, and respect, but not the emotional acknowledgement they had yearned for. A heavy silence fell over them. The desert night seemed to press in, the wind quiet, the stars flickering in the vast sky. The women felt a profound collapse of emotion, a wave of disappointment mixed with sadness. It was not anger, not resentment. simply the realization that their longing could not be fulfilled in the way they imagined. They had been hoping for connection, for something beyond the boundaries Samuel maintained, and now they had to face the reality of his principles. Maria finally spoke, her voice low and trembling. We understand. We respect your rules, your choices, but it is difficult. We hoped for more, perhaps warmth, reassurance, something to make us feel that our hearts are seen. Samuel placed a hand lightly on the step beside him, careful to maintain distance. I cannot give what I do not believe is right, but I promise you this. I will always treat you with fairness, I will protect you, and I will guide you. You are not invisible to me. Perhaps my way of showing care is not what you expected, but it is sincere. The women remained silent, their emotions raw, their hearts heavy. Yet beneath the sadness, a subtle understanding began to form. Samuel's way was different, but it was consistent and honest. He had not lied or deceived them. He had not used kindness as a tool for manipulation. His care was grounded in principles they could eventually recognize, even if it was not the type of connection they had imagined. As the night deepened, the sisters returned to their quarters. The emotional weight of the conversation lingered, heavy yet enlightening. They realized that relationships were complex, shaped not only by desire and longing, but also by integrity, honesty, and personal boundaries. They had learned that human connection did not always appear as they expected, and that understanding another person required patience, reflection, and empathy. The following days were quiet but meaningful. The emotional collapse of that night did not fade entirely, but it shifted into a deeper awareness. Maria, Lena, and Clara began to appreciate Samuel's way of caring, even if it was different from their own. They understood that trust and respect could exist without physical or emotional gestures they had once hoped for. They focused on work, on learning the rhythms of the ranch, and on finding subtle ways to express their gratitude through small acts of service, shared meals, and quiet companionship. Samuel, too, reflected on the conversation. He realized that while his principles had guided him, he could also offer moments of reassurance without compromising his values. A word of praise here, a gentle acknowledgement there, small gestures that showed recognition and respect, could bridge the emotional gap without violating boundaries. He began to practice this subtly, and the women noticed. Though not overtly emotional, his actions spoke volumes about his integrity and his sincere care. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, Samuel paused and nodded toward the women. You handled the creek repairs very well. I appreciate your diligence. It was a small acknowledgement, simple but meaningful. The sisters exchanged a glance, a quiet smile passing between them. It was not the warmth they had once hoped for, but it was connection, the recognition of their efforts, their presence, and their value. Over time, the collapse of emotion began to transform into understanding and resilience. The women learned that disappointment could coexist with gratitude, that longing could exist alongside respect, and that human relationships were often more complicated than they first appeared. They discovered strength within themselves, patience, and the ability to appreciate honesty even when it did not match their expectations. By the end of Part 3, the turning point was clear. The emotional confrontation had revealed the depth of longing, frustration, and misunderstanding, but it also laid the foundation for trust and mutual respect. Samuel and the women had faced the challenge of reconciling different expectations, cultures, and ways of expressing care. They had stumbled, struggled, and confronted their emotions head-on, and now they were ready to move toward understanding and connection in new, more grounded ways. The ranch, under the wide desert sky, continued to be a place of work, reflection, and discovery. The women's hearts were heavier but wiser, and Samuel's principles had been tested and softened by empathy and awareness. The stage was set for the final part of the story, where respect, patience, and understanding would bring resolution, growth, and the quiet satisfaction of human connection built on trust and sincerity. The following morning, the desert sky was pale and calm, with soft sunlight spilling across the dusty plains. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and earth across the ranch. After the intense conversation of the previous evening, the mood on the ranch felt different, quieter, but more reflective. Maria, Lena, and Clara woke with a sense of cautious hope. They had confronted Samuel, expressed their feelings, and heard his honest words. While it had not been easy, the experience had brought clarity. They understood that connection could take many forms, and that Samuel's way of showing care was sincere, even if it was different from what they had hoped. The women approached their morning chores with renewed energy. Maria worked in the kitchen, preparing breakfast and planning for the garden. She moved with purpose, her mind focused not just on completing tasks, but on making each action meaningful. Lena tended to the animals, feeding them and checking their pens carefully, her attention to detail sharper than ever. Clara moved between the two, helping wherever needed, but also observing, reflecting, and quietly noting the subtle changes in Samuel's behavior. Samuel, meanwhile, noticed the shift in the women. There was a sense of calm determination in the way they moved, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Their diligence and dedication were unchanged, but now it was accompanied by an understanding, an acceptance that made their presence easier to appreciate. Samuel allowed himself to acknowledge their efforts more openly, offering small words of recognition and praise. "Good work this morning," he said as he checked the fence near the pasture. "The animals look healthy and the pens are secure. I appreciate your attention." The women exchanged glances, a small smile passing among them. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it meant much more than words. It was a sign that Samuel saw them, respected their work, and valued their presence. It was a subtle but meaningful connection that bridged the gap between principle and emotion, between expectation and reality. Over the following days, the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. The women continued their chores, and Samuel maintained his watchful guidance. Yet there was a new lightness in their interactions. Small gestures began to appear, an extra word of advice here, a nod of approval there, a shared laugh while tending to the garden. These moments, though subtle, carried weight. They were evidence that understanding and trust could grow even without overt displays of emotion. Maria, Lena, and Clara began to find other ways to express their gratitude and appreciation. They shared meals together, preparing dishes with care and thoughtfulness. They told stories from their past, sharing memories of their village, their family, and their traditions. Samuel listened, sometimes offering quiet comments or asking thoughtful questions. Though he did not openly express emotion, his attention and engagement demonstrated his respect and consideration. The women also learned to support one another in new ways. Maria guided her sisters, offering wisdom and encouragement. Lena used humor and small acts of kindness to ease tension and foster understanding. Clara, ever observant, reflected on the lessons of patience, empathy, and resilience they had learned. Together, they created a micro-community within the ranch, a place of emotional support that complemented Samuel's protective and principled guidance. One afternoon, a challenge arose on the ranch. A sudden storm had caused a small section of the fence to collapse, and some of the cattle had wandered toward the edge of the property. Samuel immediately sprang into action, calling the women to help. Maria organized the effort, instructing Lena and Clara on how to round up the animals and secure the fence. The women worked efficiently, moving quickly but carefully under Samuel's guidance. The shared experience of problem-solving and teamwork brought a new sense of connection. It was not born from words or gestures of warmth alone, but from cooperation, respect, and trust. After the storm passed, the group gathered on the porch, catching their breath and observing the quiet desert evening. The stars began to appear, twinkling above the horizon. The women felt a deep sense of relief and accomplishment. They had faced a challenge together, and it had strengthened their bond, not only with each other but also with Samuel. They could see the value in his guidance, the sincerity in his principles, and the subtle ways he had demonstrated care. Maria spoke softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "We have learned so much here," she said. "Not just about work, but about patience, understanding, and respect. We see now that care can take many forms, and that even when it is not exactly what we expect, it can still be real and meaningful." Lena nodded, her eyes bright with thoughtfulness. "Yes. We thought we needed more, something visible and immediate, but we now understand that connection can grow quietly, through actions, integrity, and shared experience." Clara, the youngest, added, "And we have learned to be patient, to observe, and to appreciate the ways people care in their own way. I think we have grown stronger and closer because of that understanding." Samuel listened to their words, a quiet satisfaction in his chest. He had never claimed to be skilled in emotional expression, yet he had maintained his principles while protecting and guiding the women. Their recognition of his intentions brought a sense of fulfillment that was subtle but profound. He realized that mutual respect, honesty, and effort could create a bond as strong as any expressed through conventional gestures of warmth. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the ranch continued, marked by work, quiet conversation, and small moments of connection. The women became more confident in their roles, taking initiative and offering suggestions for improvements to the garden, the animal pens, and the daily routines. Samuel acknowledged their ideas, implementing some of them, which further strengthened the sense of mutual respect. Occasionally, they would sit together in the evenings, sharing stories, laughing softly, or simply watching the stars. These moments, simple yet profound, allowed them to feel connected without violating boundaries. Samuel's presence, steady and principled, had become a source of reassurance. The women had learned to appreciate his way of showing care, and he had learned to recognize the importance of small acknowledgments and gestures in building trust. The emotional growth of the women was evident not only in their work, but in their interactions with one another and with Samuel. Maria had become more patient and reflective, understanding that expressing feelings required careful timing and thoughtful words. Lena had learned that humor, kindness, and observation could communicate more than words alone. Clara had gained insight into the complexity of human relationships, learning to see beyond immediate expectations and recognize the value of principles and integrity. As the seasons changed, the ranch flourished. The animals were healthy, the fields productive, and the home well kept. The women had not only survived but thrived, learning lessons of resilience, patience, and understanding. Samuel's guidance and principles had provided a structure within which they could grow, while their efforts, sincerity, and determination had enriched the life of the ranch. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, the women sat on the porch looking out over the land. The desert was calm, the air soft, and the sky filled with stars. Maria spoke first. "We have come a long way," she said, her voice gentle but strong. "We have faced disappointment, longing, and challenge, but we have also learned to respect, to understand, and to grow. This place, it has taught us much." Lena added, "We see now that connection does not always look the way we imagine. It can be quiet, subtle, and still powerful. We can feel it through respect, honesty, and shared experience." Clara, smiling softly, said, "And we have learned that patience and observation can reveal the truth of someone's care. Even when it is not expressed in the way we hoped, it can still be real, meaningful, and lasting." Samuel, listening from the porch steps, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had maintained his principles, guided the women, and protected them, while allowing them to grow and learn. Their recognition of his efforts and their own growth and understanding had created a bond stronger than he had anticipated. It was a bond of mutual respect, integrity, and shared experience, a connection that would endure beyond expectations or conventional gestures. The ranch under the vast desert sky became more than a place of work. It became a place of learning, reflection, and emotional growth. The women and Samuel had discovered that relationships were built not only on affection, but on honesty, respect, and shared effort. They had faced challenges, confronted emotions, and learned the subtle ways in which care and connection could exist. By the end of Part 4, the story reached a satisfying resolution. Maria, Lena, and Clara had found a sense of belonging, purpose, and emotional understanding. Samuel had discovered the quiet rewards of guiding and respecting others while maintaining his principles. Together, they had created a small community defined by trust, integrity, and mutual recognition. The desert sun set fully, casting long shadows over the ranch. The stars shone brightly, each one a reminder of the vastness of the world and the small, meaningful connections that could be forged within it. The women and Samuel had learned that life, though often challenging and unpredictable, could be navigated with patience, respect, and understanding. Their journey had been difficult, but it had led to growth, trust, and a quiet, lasting connection. And so the ranch continued to thrive, a symbol of resilience, patience, and the human capacity for understanding. The women's hearts, once heavy with longing, now carried a deeper sense of clarity and hope. Samuel's presence, steady and principled, had become a source of guidance and reassurance. Together, they faced the future with confidence, respect, and the knowledge that true connection, though subtle and often quiet, could endure and flourish in the most unexpected ways.